Greetings and welcome back to our study in the Book of Esther. Today we are in Esther chapter 8. The story has, in some ways reached its climax. Haman is dead. He's been impaled on a stake that he had set up for Mordecai. And now we see some measure of resolution to the conflict. If you haven't read the chapter, I highly recommend that you pause the video here, go back, read the chapter, and then come back and join us and see what you can get out of the study. But it does help to have some of the details fresh in your mind. And so we come to Esther 8, and we see that King Ahasuerus and Esther don't have the same goals in mind. It's evident from the start. The king gives Esther Haman's house, gives Mordecai, at least some of Haman's authority, and yet Esther and Mordecai are not satisfied. The king thinks, he's made up for the slight, for the insult, because he has reversed any damage on Mordecai and Esther personally by giving them Haman's stuff. And, of course, we see that Esther and Mordecai are thinking bigger, and they want their people to also be saved. This shows, again, the king's lack of character. He does not care that hundreds or thousands of his subjects might be killed here shortly. All he cares about is himself and keeping those around him happy and comfortable. And so his philosophy is that if he gives Esther this house, if he gives her the plunder from Haman's stuff, then he has made things right by Esther, not thinking about the actual situation. So here again, we see Ahasuerus' character in regards to Esther. Thankfully, Esther does something very similar to what she does at the beginning of the story. She goes in and she falls down in front of the king. Here again, we're seeing a picture of him at court. We're not seeing her beside him ruling on a throne. We're seeing him by himself at court. And she comes up as a normal petitioner, just with all the other petitioners, and falls down in front of him and says, hey, can we save my people now? This is a reminder to us that she really doesn't have that much authority. She doesn't really have that much power, even though it seems like at times she has power, she has authority. In the end, she only has power, she only has authority when it's convenient for the king, or when the king is amused by her or some other way. She does not actually have power, but she does have power for her people. She is the archetype of a competent ruler who cares about her people. And so she uses what clout she has in order to advance their causes. So that's where Esther is. And again, we see that even though Esther frames this as what Haman has done, Haman has harmed the Jews. Haman is the one who is responsible for this horrible edict. We know that the king signed off on this. And here again, even though Haman is presented as the bad guy, and even though the decree, this edict, is going to kill thousands of people, the king can't back down from it because the king doesn't want to lose face. The king does not want to overturn the decree, because to overturn the decree would be to be admitting failure, admitting defeat, admitting that somehow or another he was wrong, and he can't have that, so he can't back down. Meaning Esther and Mordecai have to come up with something new. They have to come up with a different solution to their problem. And so they come up with the solution of allowing the Jews to fight back. Now, here we have a difficulty. We have a dilemma. because on one hand, we have to read this section of the book within the literary context, within the literary whole. And on another hand, we have to consider the potential ethical or historical ramifications here. So in a literary sense, we read this letter, this edict that Mordecai drafts that allows the Jews to kill anyone who attacks them. And then it goes further, not just to kill anybody who attacks them, but to kill anybody who attacks them, plus take revenge on their enemies and their families, the families of their enemies. So they are allowed to kill innocent women and children and take the plunder. From a literary standpoint, this is an exact reversal of Haman's plan to wipe out the Jews. And so, from a literary standpoint, this letter makes perfect sense because it is a complete 180 of Haman's plan. Everything Haman has tried to do has now started to come undone. Haman's plan to kill Mordecai has resulted in his death. Haman's plan to wipe out the Jews is now going to result in the Jews' enemies being wiped out. This is literally important because it shows us that even though God is not mentioned, God is reversing everything that the people who are working for evil are trying to do. But even though there's this literary give and take, this literary counterpoint, we still have to recognize that there are serious issues with what Mordecai is doing. If we are going to read this as a historical document, if you think that Esther borders more on the history than on the fiction side of the scale, then you have to wrestle with this reality that Mordecai is doing something here that we would find appalling. He is allowing for the slaughter of innocent people by the Jews simply because the Jews identify them as enemies, and allowing the Jews to take their plunder simply because the Jews want it. Now, this is a major issue for us, or at least it should be, if we're going to see this as history, because we are called, and by extension, all God's people are called to live out a certain morality, a certain ethic. And this story, this letter, clearly violates that ethic. Not only does it violate what many of us would consider a New Testament ethic, it actually violates what God told the people of Israel to do in Deuteronomy. The people of Israel were told not to kill innocent women and children. They were told not to take the plunder. They were told to, they were allowed to defend themselves, but they were really not supposed to be terribly aggressive people going out and making war on the people around them. They were especially to avoid brutality. Let's put it that way. They were called to avoid these kind of brutalities that many other civilizations would have been known for. So here we have Mordecai expressly allowing the people to violate God's covenant with them. And we have to recognize this. We cannot just mythologize and hero worship Mordecai because he's the protagonist of this part of the story. We can't just gloss over this and say, well, Mordecai is the hero of the story, therefore God is speaking to him, therefore God said it, therefore it is good, even though it contradicts that. No, we have to remain consistent. We have to remain ethical people. Consistency is part of ethics. And so we have to call out Mordecai and say, yeah, this is part of what we recognize as troubling. This is not something that we should condone. Yes, it eliminates the Israelite enemies, but does it do it in a way that is just and in accord with what God truly wants? Well, the answer to that is no. And so we have to recognize that. We have to say, well, no, this is not good. We also have to look at the idea, or look at how the letter is received and how this all plays in the context of the book. So we see that Mordecai writes this letter and the people rejoice. Now, this is one of these things that is somewhat difficult. The language, just getting around this, or getting this in our heads. What is probably happening is not that many people are converting to Judaism because they're scared or anything like that. Rather, this is the people giving political favor to Mordecai's idea. They're saying, yes, the Jews shouldn't be targeted like this. If this is the solution to allow them to retaliate against those who hate them, the bulk of the people are behind this. We're going to see that in the next chapter, not everybody is behind it, but I think this is kind of one of these phrases where the author is trying to convey support for the good, support for the Jews, even if it's embellished and exaggerated a little bit. Historically, I can't imagine too many people in Susa would have cared too much. They probably would have looked out and gone, well, not my fight, I don't care. They just wouldn't have messed with this. But that's where we see the people, they're presented as aligning with Esther and Mordecai and the Jews. And as we leave this chapter, we leave it with this concept that Mordecai and Esther are, they've kind of solved the problem. They're coming, they have a solution. They're going to allow the Jews to defend themselves. They're going to allow the Jews to take plunder. Mordecai and Esther have been compensated for the hardships that Haman has caused them. And so we're just ready to complete the reversal of Haman and see how that plays out in the last two chapters, which we will do next time. We are coming to the end of this study. If you're enjoying this, if you're getting something out of it, I encourage you to drop me a line. Let me know what we can do next, how we can continue these series to help you better understand the Bible. Until that next time, God bless.